Okay, it looks like that's going. Jeff, if you want to go ahead and start sharing the slides since you're
got it
first, and then I'll kick us off.
Let me just make sure we'll do this one. We'll share that. And that should hopefully start the presentation. How's that?
Yeah, it's perfect. Okay, so welcome everyone to a joint session between Kaltura and Unizin. We're so glad to see all of you here, and we're excited for the discussion today and some good questions to follow. What we really wanted to focus on today are some current efforts in video data analytics, especially with the reality of online learning over the past year and its increased emphasis. The importance of video data has just grown. And so we wanted to take an opportunity today to talk about some of the efforts that Kaltura is doing in that space, as well as with the current capabilities of the UDP, how we are trying to mobilize the consortium around video data and, in larger context, event data in general. So I'll do a quick introduction of me, then I'll hand it over to Jeff, and he's got the first part of the presentation. So I'm Kyle Unruh. I'm the data solutions architect at Unizin. I've been at Unizin for a little over a year now, maybe a year and 3 months. And in that time, I've really gotten to know the UDP pretty closely, and I've really enjoyed working with our Unizin members on trying to get the most out of the UDP and understanding their learning analytics priorities, challenges, and overall needs. And I'm joined with Jeff, so I'll let Jeff introduce himself.
Thanks, Kyle. Hi, folks. My name is Jeff Rubenstein. I'm the Vice President of Product for the Education Vertical at Kaltura. I've been kicking around EdTech for a very long time. Used to work for Wimba before Blackboard acquired us. I worked for 2U for many years, building online programs. Went off and did a startup trying to bring technology for learning into prisons. And when that didn't work out so well, came on board with Kaltura. I also am an active participant in a lot of what happens at IMS Global. So I participate in the LTI team, the Caliper team, the accessibility working group, the adaptive learning work group, and a new standard called Open Video Capture that is working its way through the process currently at IMS. And I'm really thrilled that Kyle agreed to come along with me. This is in principle one of the dreaded sponsor sessions. But frankly, I hate sponsor sessions. I mean, you can, it's like, yeah, I'd much rather do something that actually gives value to the community. And that's really helpful that Kyle's along, because, I have a piece of the puzzle in terms of the data, and am working harder to give even more of it, which we'll talk about today. But obviously, it's the UDP and Unizin that make it actually into valuable information for teaching and learning. So I wanted to do something that was really, trying to give you guys as much information as possible about what's happened, what's going to be happening, and some of the initiatives that are going on with Unizin right now. So with that, I'll take a few moments and talk about what Kaltura has done and sort of why. So I've been working along with Unizin and Etienne, the CTO, who's also been an active participant in the Caliper working group, on this learning analytics journey for quite some time, which is why the UDP and Unizin make me very happy because it actually gets, data in your hands. And that hasn't always been so obvious. Even though we've all known the value of some of this, to almost every constituent, in the ecosystem here, you have students who it would be good if we could show them data on their own performance. If any of you have seen what Michigan has done with their MILA initiative, I think that's a fascinating project, showing the data to students about how they're spending their time, and so they can sort of engage metacognitively with students saying, hey, are you spending your time in the right way to be as successful as you want to be? Of course, for instructors who can get a much more complete view of student activities, which is right now scattered across various tools, and help intervene when intervention is useful. Administrators, of course, who want to help reduce attrition. and improve their programs. And of course, researchers being able to do large scale effective studies, which is something unique with UDP, being able to take data from lots of places and bring it all together. So that I think is probably news to nobody. And likewise, this bit, which is that for many, many years, this was the challenge, that you have an architecture where you have the LMS kind of in the middle, getting roster information from the SIS, and the LMS knows some data about the student, page views, file openings, maybe some quizzes and a gradebook. And then you have all these tools around the outside, which are everything from digital products like a Pearson My Math Lab or a McGraw-Hill Alex product or a Cengage MindTap product. And that, knows something about the student, how they did in that particular digital product. You have tools like virtual classrooms. You have tools like video platforms. You have tools like survey systems. You have ebooks and other digital content, Top Hat, Vital Source, etc. And they each know a bit of a different slice of the data of the student. So on the right, I just, here's a report of some student performance. But the problem is, of course, that no one's going to go into every one of these tools and look at that data. Certainly teachers won't. And even if you try to do some research, and there have been some interesting bits of research done, some of you may recall John Whitmer did a big piece with UMBC many years ago. He took data from Vital Source and Blackboard and did some pretty interesting work showing that, if you hadn't done X% of your course material in Blackboard and Vital Source by week 3, you had a much worse chance of completing the course successfully. Really interesting stuff. I asked him how long it'd take you. He said about 2 months. Because by the time you extract the data from all those sources, you build the ETLs, then you have to massage the data into some way that it can be compared. It's incredibly time consuming. And this should be the kind of exercise that you can just write your specs, run the report. Write your specs, run the report. Hence the need for the LRS, and in this case, the UDP, to gather all that information and to gather it with sufficient semantic information about what the data means to be able to run informative reports about it. So if you haven't yet been acquainted with IMS and IMS Caliper, although probably everyone at this conference has, IMS is the group that promulgates these standards like LTI and One Roster and Caliper, among others. And Caliper is the particular standard that deals with student activity data, or so it could be SIS data as well. And it's an extensible format that any tool can emit on, and it can emit with a certain level of semantic richness because of these things called metric profiles. It emits basically like this. It's very similar to XAPI in its idea, but it's much more tailored to the needs of education because it helps leverage LTI, whereas XAPI needs to do a lot more system-to-system negotiation. But basically, it sends messages of this sort, that Jeff did something. Jeff viewed this PDF. And because of these metric profiles, the verbs in this, the actions in this triple here, have some extra meaning. So part of the Caliper spec is that we have these things called metric profiles that are vocabularies that can be used across systems, across tools. So they mean the same thing when they're sent from every tool. And the first thing that we did, and we were one of the Caliper launch partners, is we started emitting at the very first on this thing called the media profile, which sends events like Jeff started this video, Jeff stopped this video, Jeff advanced to time code 123, Jeff rewound, etc. Jeff finished. And that was the first step that got us going, and with the UDP starting to send data right away. The second thing we did was we started emitting on the assessment profile, and the slide is actually outdated. We have been emitting on that for quite some time, in fact. And the assessment profile, and again, these profiles are made such that they can be used by any tool. So a quiz engine or a quiz inside of a digital product can also emit on the assessment profile, which says things like Jeff answered question number 1 with the answer A. It can even do things like tell you how long Jeff took. Jeff took 4 minutes and 5 seconds to answer the question. And we've been sending that data now for, I think, at least 9 months or a year. Then the next thing that we're doing is expanding on that assessment profile to include some of the other interactives that we offer. So a couple things that we offer in our platform is we offer not only these in-video quizzes, which can send off data like Jeff answered A to number 1, Jeff answered B to number 2, but we also have these interactives that do other things like a sort of a choose your own adventure branching scenarios type situational learning exercise, where, for instance, you're a nurse and you see a video clip of a patient being wheeled in, bleeding from the stomach. And then it stops and says, what do you do? A, do you call the ER? B, do you run around screaming with your hair on fire? Or C, do you give them a shot of morphine? And then depending on what you click on, the scenario plays out. So you call the ER, okay? Then the next thing goes, okay, call the ER. The doctor asks, what's the most important vital sign? Okay, what did you do first? Blood pressure, pulse, whatever. You get the idea. And you can actually create some pretty interesting and complicated scenarios. And the next thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be emitting that data also on the assessment profile. So you can start using those as assessments. Did the person take the right path, for instance? And then the next thing that we're really excited about, at least I am, is this thing called the live session profile. Certainly with COVID, a lot of instruction moved very rapidly to virtual classrooms of various kinds. Moved to virtual platforms of various kinds. Some more classroom suitable than others. Obviously, this is a very emerging space. You probably have all seen the recent entry of the founder of Blackboard, Michael Chasen's new venture, to move into virtual classrooms in a way that he thinks is more class-like. We also have our own virtual classroom that we've built to be a little more class-ish than, say, just Zoom or WebEx, which are really meeting platforms. And we think that learning is more than just meeting. But one of the important things, besides the fact that we treat these recordings much more seriously, because if you're a student, the most important thing to you is to be able to watch the recording of the class you missed, if you missed one. And most platforms are really bad at that. But the most important feature here for us is that of the data we can send back, because we know who attended and therefore who didn't. So we can have people search the recordings by was I there or wasn't I? So you can find the ones you missed. But much more importantly, how active were you? How many times did you chat? How many times did you raise your hand? How many times did you speak? How many times did you answer a question in a poll? How long were you in focus, i.e. the classroom window is the one on top, etc. And all that is really valuable data. So the new profile that we're working on right now is a profile to emit all that information. So you can start to, again, for all of the possible reasons we showed above, for students, we can show students how active they were and say, hey, maybe you should pay more attention or be more involved. For teachers, we could say, teachers, you were engaging, or maybe you weren't very engaging because the entire class fell asleep, etc. And you can start then correlating activity inside the virtual classroom with, say, performance. So for us, this live video and the recordings of this video are video objects that should be data rich and send all this off. And I'm quite confident that as soon as this profile is done and we begin emitting on it, Kyle and company will be happy to take it and make that also part of the data that they're providing in the UDP. So that's really briefly what we've been up to and what we're up to next in the future. And I will turn it now over to Kyle for the next section.
All right, thanks, Jeff. As we were preparing this presentation for today, what I kind of thought would be a nice complement to some of the work that Jeff just went through on the Kaltura side would be to look at it almost from the Unizin side and how we are currently doing standards-based reporting through the UDP, of which Caliper events are a big part, and Kaltura events that follow the Caliper standard are a big part. But we also wanted to show it kind of through a lens of operational reporting and also institutional research. So I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully share the right screen. Let's see, we'll start back here. And so before we go into some of these institutional examples of operational reporting using these standard-based events, I wanted to just give a quick overview of the UDP as I see it for anyone that may not be as familiar with the UDP. I see some familiar faces in the crowd, so if you need a drink of water or something, this might be a good time to go do that. But just to kind of set the stage for the UDP, I think of it in terms of three main ideas. And the first one is to unify the teaching and learning data ecosystem. The reality of education as it stands today is you have to have a wide variety of tools to make a first-class learning experience for your students. And each tool has a very targeted purpose. And when they're all brought together, you get an online classroom that meets your students' needs and hopefully facilitates that learning. On the back end, though, each of those tools perhaps have their own API. They have their own standards for the way that they like to express their data. And so it makes analyzing student behavior across those tools very difficult if we don't have a way to unify that. So the UDP has at its core a design that takes any number of teaching and learning tools at an institution and brings it all together in one place to facilitate better analytics. The second main idea is related to the first. Part of the process for bringing all this data together requires a transformation of that data in a sense to translate it into a common language so that talking about a course offering in tool A is expressed the same way as a course offering in tool B. And so we do that through two different standards. One is the Unizin Common Data Model, which is an in-house standard that we've developed to describe learners, learning environments, and learning processes. And then the second standard is this IMS Global Caliper standard that Jeff mentioned, which is really heavy for events, for student clicks and student behaviors. And a lot of the dashboards that we're going to show today heavily use those IMS Global Caliper events with those media profiles and other profiles that Jeff mentioned. And the last main idea, as I see it, is the ability to create data marts and services layers on top of the raw data. So we have the UDP, which is a gigantic database, but the way that it's designed is relational in nature for the most part. And it also allows us to create views and tables and schemas on top of the raw tables to have targeted views and targeted sections of data that answer questions. This makes it more approachable for stakeholders, and it makes it possible to do dashboarding exercises with less runway, I guess, or less barrier to entry. We're able to do things and bring data together to answer very specific questions, and it engages more conversation without requiring people to learn the entirety of the UDP. So these are the three main ideas. And to look at it visually, you have on the left-hand side, this is the reality of teaching and learning, right? So you have all of these tools. Primarily, the two big ones are the SIS, which captures student information such as transcript grades, demographics, et cetera, enrollments. Then you have Canvas for the LMS. These are the two big ones that are used pretty frequently. And then you have any number of teaching and learning tools. And I just have a few here like Top Hat, Turnitin, Macmillan, and then Kaltura, which is a really good example for today. And all of these tools are fed into the UDP, which is built on top of Google Cloud, utilizing both the Unizin common data model to translate data from each of these source systems into common terms, as well as the IMS Global Caliper standard. And the teaching and learning tools down here are the ones that use the IMS Global Caliper standard. Canvas uses both, and then the SIS uses the Unizin common data model. No need to know the specifics of those today, but just know that this is only possible because we have standards-based analytics and standards-based data. Once it's in the UDP on Google Cloud, you have resources that scale, and you have cloud-first infrastructure. So you get security benefits of that. And as your data grows, so does the infrastructure behind it. And it doesn't require the institution to have any infrastructure of their own on site to maintain in order to have this data all aggregated in one place. Once it's on Google Cloud, the UDP is then a single entry point for any report, dashboard, or research application. So there's no need to learn the individual APIs for each of the tools you want to bring in. There's no need to, as Jeff mentioned, for John Whitmer's example, to massage the data and bring it in. There's no need to spend your time doing that because it's already standardized on the UDP. So it acts as a catalyst for more analytics, and we try not to have it get in the way. So we're also able to define data marts that can then fuel dashboards. And so where we're going to go from this view here is actually focus on like just this dashboarding piece. And what we've done is for today, we've gotten approval from Oregon State to show some of the operational and institutional research dashboards that we've been developing with them. Before I transition to those dashboards, the data is real, but student names have been masked, and instructor names that you see are real instructor names, but those have been approved to show. We're not going to show any of the underlying data to protect, the privacy of other pieces of data that aren't reported. And we're only showing 3 dashboards. So there are more dashboards we could show, but we're just going to show 3 for today that have been approved. If anyone is opposed to seeing those dashboards, let me know in the chat now. David Goodrum is on the call from Oregon State, and him and his team have given approval. So I'm going to transition to those dashboards now, and let me know if it's a little small on your end because I can make it a little bit bigger. Let's see. Okay. Let's see. Now the chat is in the way. I'm going to move this up here. Okay, so the inception of each of these dashboards came from just honest, organic conversations with the Oregon State team about what they wanted to get out of their teaching and learning data. And the first one that I'm going to show is really around the topic of engagement. And really kind of the tip of the iceberg for engagement is trying to track when students have logged in or accessed content. So the idea here is that students that access course content more frequently are perhaps more likely to succeed, or maybe the opposite is true. Students that haven't accessed their courses in a long time have probably disengaged from their course content and could perhaps need an intervention. So what we've done as a first pass is look at just the last time that a student is logged in, and we're calling this the last activity dashboard. So what we have is we have some high level filters up here, and all of these are motivated by the events that we see coming from these IMS Caliper events. So in terms of last activity, we're looking at, for perhaps a Kaltura example, the last time a student started a video or the last time a student paused a video. If that's the most recent event for that course, we take that timestamp and then we log that as their last activity. They could be doing other things like page navigations or using other LTI tools. It doesn't matter what the tool is. For the last activity, we're just looking for whatever they've done in that class, the most recent example of that. So by default, we're looking at spring 2021 first. We have departments that we could filter by, and we have courses that we could then filter by if we'd like to, and even the instructors. We think the instructors are going to be a big audience of this, so we could see this going through perhaps a virtualization layer where each instructor only sees his or her classes. But for now, we do have an instructor filter, which we pull from the enrollments actually. So we're able to determine who teaches each class through that data. We're able to count up the total number of distinct users that we see in these events. And then where the first real insight is, we're able to kind of bin the last activity that we see for each student along kind of a weekly schedule. So we see that most students, which is I think a good sign, most students at Oregon State have been logging in within 1 day. This data updates every hour. So this is as of the most recent hour. 55% of Oregon State students have logged in within 24 hours, followed by 2 days, 3 days, and then more than a week. So on average, we see 3.4 days pass between students logging in, which translates to 82 hours. And we have a tabular view down here for perhaps if you just want a little bit more detail, we're able to look by department, course, and then the user ID and when this person was last seen. And so we see that some of these students haven't logged in since March. So these might be good candidates to look for. What we might want to also do is just look at a window. So maybe we only want to look at students that haven't logged in 4 days or more. So we can use these more granular filters to see that, for students that haven't logged in more greater than or equal to 4 days, we see that the average for this group of students is actually 17.5 days. Some of these students in March, maybe they've dropped, maybe they have transferred, maybe these are opportunities to kind of explore why these students maybe aren't engaging. If they are still enrolled, then we definitely need to get advisors to look at these students. And we can do this again by days. We can also look at hours. So if we just want to look at students that have logged in the last 12 hours, we can do it this way too. And so we have, on average, these students have logged in the last 3 hours, and this is when we've last seen them as well. So with that, I'm now going to move to the next dashboard, which is the tool launches dashboard. And the audience for this dashboard is really around people that want to see how tools are being utilized. And the conversation with Kaltura is a natural fit for this one too, because Kaltura is one of the main video platforms at Oregon State. So we definitely want to see how courses are utilizing these tools. So by default, we have the same spring 2021 and the same filters. We are able to look at the names of each tool. We're able to gather the names of the tools from the events that are being sent. So if an event comes from Kaltura, there's a field in that IMS Global Caliper spec event that has the name of the tool or a URL that we can map to a name. So this is how we're able to get the names of these tools. There aren't connections to each of these individual tool APIs. We're connecting solely to the UDP event store. We have the tool type, and we also can, again, have instructor for that same audience. If an instructor just wants to look at their courses and how their courses are utilizing tools. By default, because there's so much data here, we limit it to just 30 days. Otherwise, the report would take a long time to load. You can make this wider, but I think 30 days is a good window, especially for Oregon State, who just started their spring quarter. So their spring quarter started on March 28th. And so you can kind of see perhaps these few events here that are happening across tools are instructors testing the event, testing the courses, or testing the content before it goes live. And then you can see first day of enrollment, we see a bunch of events that are being fired across all of these tools. And so every single Caliper event that comes in is listed. And then we have, based on the total number of launches in descending order, the tools that are being utilized the most. So you can, if we wanted to do like a filter on just a certain type of course or a certain department, we could then see how that department or how that group of courses, which tools are most important. And then we can map that to We can map that to the utilization and investment of that tool, perhaps from a financial standpoint or from just an operational standpoint on whether that tool is, if we're getting the most out of that tool. And again, we have a tabular view here that can show you by course and instructor, the enrollments, the number of unique users that have launched in that course, and then the total number of launches, as well as the total number of tools that are being used in that course as well. So with that, I'm gonna move to the last dashboard, which we call the course content interactions dashboard. And this one takes just a second to load, so I'll let it get there. So this one, we started with conversations around really looking through the lens of an instructor. They spend a lot of time designing their courses, especially for courses that were traditionally taught in person that have now been forced online. There's been a lot of effort on the instructor side to really make sure that their courses are top-notch and that the content that they're putting on their courses is resonating with students. So we wanted to put together a view based on the events that we see students clicking on content in courses versus the content that's available. What's resonating most with students? And so we have a high-level set of filters up here too. Again, instructor name. We can filter by course and content type as well. Just what we've done is we've binned content type along very common metrics. So we're grouping anything that looks like a Word document. We're just kind of putting in a Microsoft Word. This is something that could be fine-tuned depending on your institution. Different groupings might make sense, but these are the high levels that we've started with today. And also we can filter by when the piece of content was created. So just with the default settings, which is for the spring 2021 term, we have 121,000 individual views of content. So this is looking at anytime someone has clicked, started a video, clicked on a file, done anything that is related to something uploaded in Canvas, we count this as a content view. We're able to identify almost 6,500 individual pieces of content. And within those 6,500 pieces of content, 41% of those have been seen at least one time. We also want to kind of split this by type. So of the pieces of content, the 6,500 here, most of those are PDFs, which I think makes sense. And then followed by images, Word documents, and then PowerPoints. And kind of a different pivot on that is shown here. So based on the 121,000 views, which type of content is being seen with the greatest frequency or with the greatest confidence? So what we see is actually other and unknown, which is probably just a mapping thing that we could probably refine, is seen 67% of the time. So or 67% of those files have been seen at least once. Followed by Excel documents. So even though Excel doesn't make up the most in terms of the number of content at Oregon State, it gets seen with at least once more often than other types of content, with audio being the kind of the trailer here. And in fact, one of the really interesting things that I've noticed, we've been operating these dashboards for a couple of different institutions, or almost as a beta pilot, is that audio is always on the end. It's almost like if you just need to tell your students something, it's better to just put a screen recording with it and make it a video instead of keeping it an MP3. Like MP4s are better than MP3s, which I think, and that's across the board. I've looked at this data at Indiana and Colorado State, and now starting to look at it at Iowa and Wisconsin, and it's consistent. So videos are better, audio's not as good, not the best choice. So this is kind of the summary in terms of course content interactions. And then what I'll do is just as an example, we'll just pick an instructor here. And so whenever we pick an instructor, this is specific just to this instructor. This instructor has 4,100 content views. This is the split. And they have, their images are doing better than the other types of content. What we can see though down here is we have a list of files in descending order by the percentage of course enrollments that have actually seen that content. And what we can do is with just maybe picking on this file, because it looks like it's a syllabus PDF, we kind of want as many students as possible to see this. If we click on this file, we're then able to see there's 70 students enrolled in this course. And of those 70 students, 65% have seen this piece of content, but this is the list of students that have not seen this content. And so what we can do in an operational way for these 26 students is we can download a CSV, or we can download an Excel sheet, and then we can take this and perhaps email or follow up with these students or do something in an operational way. There's probably a good reason why these students haven't seen the syllabus, and we kind of need to figure out what that is from an institutional research or from an operational standpoint. Those are the 3 dashboards I wanted to show today to kind of showcase the events that are coming in. Even though the events in Kaltura as a tool isn't always showcased by name on these dashboards, without Kaltura sending these events, we wouldn't have the capability to see the views of these students and have these types of analytic insights. So it's really foundational to have these views. So I'm going to transition back to the slides, and we have just a few to finish up in the last 5 minutes before questions. So I wanted to kind of with the current state of what we're able to do with events and video data kind of aggregated together into these types of dashboards, along with the conversations that we're having with Kaltura on their future looking media profiles. We've asked the consortium kind of what some of their priorities and challenges are. And so I've outlined 3 opportunities that we can perhaps have some tighter integrations with the UDP to gain more insights on how video data and other event-based data can be utilized in the future. So the first is around engagement and cognition. We looked a little bit at that with the last activity, but there's a lot more we can do than that. And the idea here is specifically with videos, a smooth, uninterrupted viewing of the video isn't always ideal. It's entirely possible that a student can start a video and then walk away and just let the video play. That means they haven't necessarily learned from that video content. So one of the things that we're interested in doing is kind of leveraging some more of the Kaltura events that they're sending or will be sending to look for the rewinds and the forward jumps and the places where we can maybe identify where students are maybe having trouble because they keep jumping back to a certain point in the video, or they might be skipping something, so it may not be resonating. So we definitely want to get finer grained detail into the parts of the video that are most valuable for the students. So rewind caliper events might be really useful for that. The changes in speed, so if a student is slowing down a video or speeding up a video, that's another indicator. And again, we kind of just want to look at these in aggregate to see where the sticking points are, especially for instructors, if they want to rework some of their content or how they instruct students. This could be really critical for that. And the assessment profile that Jeff mentioned is probably the bread and butter for this, which is probably the place we're going to start. So whenever we see assessment profile events that have forwarded to or jumped to or rewound to, that's where we're really going to start isolating those events and bringing those into application layers for these types of insights. The second integration that we're thinking about doing is linking live sessions with their recordings. So the idea here is, there's live sessions that happen that oftentimes an instructor will, perhaps maybe it's Zoom, right? Oftentimes it is Zoom. They'll do a Zoom live session and then they'll download the recording and then they'll upload that recording into Canvas later. Well, it would be great to have a way for students that miss the recording, to miss the live session, to see the recording later, and to know in aggregate the students that both saw the live session and then also viewed the recording. So we need a way to link those MP4 files that get uploaded after the fact with the live sessions that happen, perhaps through this live session profile that Jeff mentioned. So we want some metadata such as the meeting day and time, the LMS and SIS IDs of the students for both cases, the platform that it was on, whether it's Kaltura, Zoom, Google Meet, or whatever, right? And then the number of students that attended each, so the number of students attended would be for the live session, and then the number of students that viewed would be for the recording. And then we also want to introduce IDs or mappings for parent-child relationships between live recordings and video files that exist in the UDP. And I think just bringing this together is more for an operational audience, so they can get better handles on the workflows and the adoption of videos after live sessions happen. And the last one is around accessibility. So video platforms, including this current Zoom session that we're on now, has live recordings and captions of audio that's happening. And so for accessibility of students that perhaps have hearing impairments or that would prefer to maybe extract text from a video, we want to capture that text as data in the UDP somehow. So we want to start exploring a UDP entity for video accessibility. And we think a lot of this is going to be very large text fields, or at least that's kind of our first guess at it. And perhaps we would introduce something like a dictionary with key value relationships for each speaker. So ABC would be the ID of a speaker saying something like, I like that idea. And DEF would be the next speaker after that speaker for, saying that I agree or whatever that would be. So like Jeff would have, for today's session, Jeff would have an ID and then I would have an ID. And in the text of that audio transcription, we would be able to see who spoke in what order. I think it's definitely a requirement for this accessibility. We also want to capture metadata on the number of speakers, who the longest speaker was, maybe who the shortest speaker was, people that didn't speak in the meeting but that attended the meeting or the session, the number of words, the ease of reading score, so we can actually analyze the text and see how easy it is to understand what's being said in the video. And the challenge here is probably multiple speakers at once, right? The key value relationship is nice if people don't talk over each other in meetings, but with virtual sessions, it inadvertently happens. And also, the quality of the translation and the transcription is also something that is a challenge, but we think there's a lot of value here for the accessibility piece of video data moving forward. So with that, we thank you for your time and attention. And now we'll transition to some questions.
If I could, I want to just inject one thing, and then
Yeah.
I do want to get to questions. At risk of this becoming a mutual congratulations society, I want to let you all know how fortunate, and how your investment is being well used by Unizin in doing this work. And first off, it makes me incredibly happy because this is the first thing I said I wanted to do when I came to Kaltura 6 years ago, and it's finally, it's real. But also, I'll tell you, being on the Caliper committee at IMS, one of the challenges right now that most other schools have, and you should know this, is that every school wants this. The LRS, the Learning Record Store ecosystem, has not emerged as we thought it would. There are just not a lot of great options. Blackboard is building their own, Blackboard data, that's still behind. Unicon is doing some work directly. Maybe Ellucian will play, but right now, you guys are, I think, in a unique position of you have this data now, and you can start doing the things we've always wanted to do with this data right now, where everyone else is saying, who can I license to do this kind of work? And that's tremendous. And I think that speaks a lot to the work of Kyle and Etienne and everyone in Unizin who has contributed to this effort. And I don't know if Kathy's here, but I mean, this is a tremendous value proposition for Unizin as an organization. I will do everything in my power, and Kaltura will, in partnership with Unizin, to make sure this keeps being even more successful. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you.
And if
Jeff.
you want to find me, I'm not hard to find. There's my email address. I'm always happy to talk about Caliper because, it's my thing.
Awesome. I do see a couple questions that I want to make sure we have time for. Both are from Carmen. So Carmen's first question, if I'm reading this correctly, more than half of the content has never been seen by these students. So currently that is the correct interpretation as the dashboard stands today. Although there's, as with most things, there's an asterisk, right? And it's around, I think it's also related to your second question around images. So images are particularly difficult for us to count on what has and hasn't been seen. If you look at image file names, there's a lot of button.png, there's a lot of image.png, there's a lot of helper images and I guess little icons and artifacts that exist around Canvas that technically, as long as they exist in the file structure of Canvas, are there and count as content, but no one's expected to see them. So one of the things that we're currently working on is ways to filter that out. And we haven't found a good closed form solution for that yet, but you're right, the number is probably understated. If we were able to, perhaps version 2 of this dashboard would be to exclude those erroneous files that we really don't care about. And along the lines of your second question, if an image is embedded in a content page, I don't think that counts as a view. I think a view, the way that we're identifying content views is a navigation event to a specific file. So you would have to go through the files or the modules of Canvas and actually open that image to count it as a view. So it's not just when a page loads. The navigation event for that just shows the page. I don't think it counts the image that loads on that page as a content view. But you're right, that could be to further boost that percentage up, we could try to start identifying pages that have images loaded and then count those navigation events to that page as a view of that image. That would probably help those numbers too.
Other questions? If not, you can get back a whole 2 minutes of your day.
This isn't so much a question as first of all, as a thank you to David Goodrum and to everybody who's here from Oregon State, or even the folks that are not here. It helps us tremendously to work directly with folks in institutional research, folks in teaching and learning centers, folks in academic research disciplines, to understand not just what data do we have, but what questions are you asking? And it's not important for those individuals to tell us how to relate the data to it, or does the data relate to it. It's important for us to have that dialogue so that we can be inspired and then consult continuously to produce something like this. This is as much an effort by Unizin as it is by Oregon State. And I'm sure there's many other nuggets out there, and there's many other dashboards undiscovered with questions being asked all over the place. Come see us, talk to Kyle, talk to James, talk to me. We really welcome that direct input, and nobody should feel like, well, I don't know what questions to ask. That's okay. We can help spur that on. That's how we get here. So that's just my speech, and you could still have your 1 minute back.
Thanks, Kathy, for those comments. I echo that and totally agree. I put my contact information in the chat. Probably would have been good to put on that last slide.
Yeah, probably should have.
Next time. Yep.
But
awesome. Well, if there are no other questions, again, feel free to reach out at any time for any questions. We'd love to hear about your learning analytics priorities and challenges and work with you on them. So thank you all for your time.
Totally.
Enjoy the
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.